Have you ever wondered why you always end up with the same kind of problematic woman? Why do your relationships always follow the same predictable script of drama, manipulation, and suffering that leaves you questioning your own sanity? The answer doesn't lie in the cosmic misfortune that supposedly haunts you. It doesn't lie in the cruel fate that determined you would be eternally unhappy in love, nor in the romantic and pathetically naive idea that love is blind. The answer lies buried in the deepest, darkest layers of your psyche, operating like an imperceptible mental virus that programs your romantic choices without you even suspecting its parasitic existence. What I'm about to reveal to you now will completely shatter your most cherished romantic illusions and force you to face an absolutely brutal truth about yourself, a truth you've spent your entire life avoiding because it's more comfortable to play the victim than to take responsibility for your own self-destructive patterns. Prepare yourself mentally, because this will hurt infinitely more than any devastating breakup you've ever experienced. This isn't sugar-coated self-help therapy. It's psychological surgery without anesthesia. The red flag woman is not a cosmic accident in your life, not a cruel trick of fate, not a statistical fluke that can be explained through mathematical probability. She is a direct and inevitable consequence of your unresolved psychological traumas, a perfect reflection of your deepest emotional wounds, which you carry like invisible scars since childhood. Sigmund Freud had already identified this dark and devastating psychological phenomenon over a century ago, giving it the technical name repetition compulsion, the irresistible and seemingly irrational tendency to obsessively recreate traumatic situations in an unconscious and desperate attempt, this time, to achieve a different outcome that will finally heal the original wounds that never healed properly. Your sick, wounded mind is desperately trying to heal childhood traumas by compulsively replaying the same destructive relationship dramas, deludedly believing that this time will be different, that this time you'll get the happy ending you've always been cruelly denied. It's like a broken record endlessly playing the same melancholy tune, convinced that if you repeat it enough times, it will eventually produce a different, harmonious melody. Your unconscious mind doesn't automatically seek out what's healthy, nourishing, and genuinely good for you. It obsessively seeks out what's familiar, which echoes the neurotic and dysfunctional patterns you internalized as a young, vulnerable, and defenseless child, absorbing like a sponge all the toxic relational patterns you witnessed during your most critical formative years. If you grew up watching your mother's emotional outbursts unpredictably, alternating chaotically between suffocating love and cruel coldness, your psyche automatically interpreted this as the normal pattern of how love works. If your father was an emotional ghost who only appeared to criticize, humiliate, or abandon you, you unconsciously developed the pathological fantasy that you need to earn love through constant suffering. If you grew up in a family environment where emotional drama and psychological instability were routinely confused with passion and true intimacy, where normal and stable relationships were considered boring and lifeless, then your unconscious definition of love was irreparably distorted from birth. You learned without realizing it that healthy relationships are synonymous with emotional boredom, that the absence of drama means the absence of passion. Now, as a theoretically mature adult, but psychologically still operating from these unprocessed childhood patterns, you unconsciously seek to recreate this toxic family dynamic you know intimately, even as it is slowly and systematically destroying you. Why would your mind do something so seemingly irrational? Because your primitive brain, the ancestral limbic system that governs your deepest emotional reactions, vastly prefers known and predictable suffering to the utterly terrifying uncertainty of the unknown. The red flag woman who enters your life like an emotional hurricane, disguised as overwhelming passion, possesses a supernatural, almost paranormal radar for detecting emotionally wounded men like you. She sniffs out your unresolved emotional need from miles away, like a predator detecting the weakness of wounded prey. She instantly recognizes your specific vulnerabilities, your unmet emotional needs, your unconscious fantasies of savior or being saved, and intuitively knows exactly which psychological buttons to push to awaken that familiar addictive feeling you mistakenly interpret as overwhelming passion. She didn't develop this skill by reading psychological manipulation manuals. This skill was cruelly forged through years of toxic relationships, where she herself had to develop, as an emotional survival mechanism, increasingly sophisticated unconscious strategies to navigate dysfunctional relationship dynamics. It's a dark talent born of necessity, refined through repetition, and has become her normal and automatic way of connecting with romantic partners. Pay careful attention to the subtle signs that your rational mind identifies as strange, disturbing, or at least questionable, but that your wounded and needy psyche interprets as irrefutable evidence that you finally found your soulmate. She's hypnotically charming during the initial phase, almost supernaturally enchanting in the way she makes you feel special, unique, chosen among thousands of men. There's an almost mystical intensity in the way she looks at you on your first dates, as if you're simultaneously the answer to prayers she never prayed and the prize she always knew she deserved but never achieved. She makes you feel like the protagonist of an epic romantic film, as if your entire previous life has been nothing more than preparation for this moment of transcendent connection. This isn't genuine love. This is love bombing, an unconscious but devastatingly effective technique of emotional manipulation, where she deliberately inundates you with excessive attention, hyperbolic compliments, dramatic displays of affection, and seductive promises of a perfect romantic future that never materializes as promised. The unconscious goal of this phase is to create a powerful chemical dependency in your brain, a neurological addiction to dopamine that makes it indispensable to your basic emotional well-being. During this artificial and calculated honeymoon, your nervous system becomes literally addicted to the dopamine it strategically releases when you show affection, when you validate yourself, when you feel special. You function exactly like a cocaine addict, desperately seeking the next hit of emotional validation. Your brain develops a tolerance for ordinary moments, beginning to interpret the lack of dramatic intensity as unbearable boredom. And when the first glaring red flag appears, and it always does, inevitably, you either ignore it completely or rationalize creatively because you're neurologically compromised, functioning with the judgment of someone on heavy drugs. Perhaps it's the peculiar way she talks about her ex-boyfriends, where all of them, without exception, are invariably described as manipulative, narcissists, toxic abusers, immature men who couldn't handle a strong, independent woman like her. Your naturally empathetic mind automatically thinks, poor thing, she's really suffered a lot at the hands of problematic and cruel men. She deserves to finally find someone who treats her with the respect and love she's always deserved. But the statistically obvious question your infatuation-drugged mind can't formulate is devastatingly simple. If literally all of your exes were problematic, without exception, who is the common denominator in this basic mathematical equation? She also demonstrates an absolutely pathological relationship with basic personal boundaries that any emotionally mature adult should instinctively respect. She invades your privacy in ways that may initially seem romantic, goes through your phone for fun, but always finds something to question. She obsessively wants to know where you are every minute because she theoretically cares deeply about your safety. But in reality, she's building a system of surveillance and control that gradually erodes your autonomy and independence. When you finally muster the courage to try to establish basic boundaries of privacy and personal autonomy, fundamental rights that every human being should have in any healthy relationship, she reacts with completely disproportionate emotional outbursts. Dramatic crying that sounds like something out of a Mexican soap opera, devastating accusations that you don't truly love her. Because if you did, you wouldn't need privacy, sophisticated emotional blackmail that makes you feel guilty for wanting basic rights. Your rational mind, when it can function in those rare moments of emotional sobriety, knows perfectly well that this behavior is deeply invasive, controlling, disrespectful, and completely unacceptable. But your unconscious mind, operating automatically from familiar patterns internalized during childhood, interprets this possessive obsession as irrefutable proof of intense and genuine love. Emotional triangulation is another diabolical specialty of hers, an art she masters with almost artistic mastery. There's always at least one other man mysteriously orbiting the relationship dynamic like an emotional satellite. The ex-boyfriend who still calls because he can't get over their epic relationship, the close friend who understands her better than anyone in the world, including you. The attractive co-worker who is just being kind and offering emotional support during a particularly difficult time in her life. These phantom men never completely disappear from the relationship narrative, never definitively eliminated from the emotional equation. They're always there, like supporting characters in a psychological play, creating a constant atmosphere of subliminal competition and calculated insecurity. It keeps you in a permanent state of emotional alert, constantly having to prove your superior worth. She knows intuitively, with a cruel wisdom, gained through experience, that emotionally wounded and needy men mistake pathological jealousy for passionate love, neurotic possessiveness for genuine displays of romantic passion, so she deliberately and systematically cultivates ambiguous situations that awaken their deepest insecurities, that activate their primal fears of abandonment and rejection. She oscillates between dramatic emotional extremes in a way that keeps you perpetually off balance, always desperately trying to decipher which unpredictable version of her you'll encounter. One day you're the absolute love of her life, the perfect man she's always dreamed of finding in her wildest romantic fantasies. The next day, without warning or logical explanation, you magically transform into the worst human being who has ever had the misfortune to breathe the same oxygen as her. This constant, exhausting emotional roller coaster isn't just ordinary emotional instability. It's a systematic, almost scientific pattern of intermittent reinforcement, the most psychologically addictive form of behavioral conditioning in nature. The same technique that makes slot machines so devastatingly addictive. You never know which emotional version of her you'll encounter when you wake up in the morning, when you come home from work, when you try to have a simple conversation about weekend plans. This constant unpredictability keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic hypervigilance, constantly releasing adrenaline and cortisol, creating an addictive neurochemical dependence on this emotional instability that your confused mind then interprets as intense passion and true love. It's a perverse and cruel conditioning process where you literally become addicted to your own suffering, where your unconscious definition of love becomes completely inseparable from chronic anxiety, constant uncertainty, and emotional roller coasters that drain your vital energy. You develop a dangerous psychological tolerance for emotional stability, beginning to interpret balanced relationships as boring and lacking chemistry. Her pathological and utterly insatiable need to be the center of attention in any social or family setting is another glaring symptom of her problematic personality structure. She simply cannot psychologically tolerate you having other legitimate priorities in life, other genuine and enriching interests, other meaningful relationships that don't revolve entirely around her emotional orbit. Gradually, almost imperceptibly and seemingly naturally, she systematically and strategically isolates you from your closest and most loyal friends, from your family who have known you since childhood, from the hobbies and personal interests that brought you joy before she became the gravitational center of your existence. And you consciously allow this to happen because she has a preternatural talent for making this social imprisonment seem incredibly romantic and passionate. I just want to spend more time alone with you because I love you so much that your presence is the only thing that truly makes me happy, she whispers, through genuine tears, when you innocently mention that you're meeting friends. Your friends don't understand you the way I do. They can't see your true essence like I can, she declares when you return from a fun night that didn't include her as the absolute protagonist. Slowly, without you consciously realizing what's happening, until it's too late to easily reverse, your social world shrinks dramatically until it becomes your only meaningful source of human interaction, emotional validation, and entertainment. It's a subtle but devastatingly effective form of psychological control that erodes your emotional independence and your ability to maintain an objective perspective on the relationship. Psychological shadow projection is another favorite weapon in her unconscious arsenal, a technique she masters with almost artistic mastery. She consistently projects onto you your own darkest shadows, your deepest insecurities, your most problematic and destructive behaviors, so that you are perpetually on the defensive, always explaining yourself, always justifying yourself, always questioning your own sanity. She systematically and relentlessly accuses you of being unfaithful and fundamentally untrustworthy, while she herself maintains ambiguous and clearly inappropriate contact with multiple men, past and present. She repeatedly calls you controlling and possessive, while she obsessively monitors your every move, every casual conversation, every social interaction. She tells you with absolute conviction that you are emotionally unstable, while she regularly explodes into episodes of completely disproportionate rage for seemingly insignificant reasons. This constant and relentless psychological projection keeps you in a permanent state of mental confusion and destructive self-doubt. You gradually begin to doubt your own perception of reality, to question whether you're truly being problematic and difficult. It's an extremely sophisticated form of gaslighting that slowly but systematically erodes your confidence in your own emotional experience. Subtle but devastating gaslighting is perhaps the most cruel technique in her repertoire. She constantly and systematically rewrites the story of reality through refined techniques of psychological manipulation that make you progressively question your own memory, your basic perception of events, and eventually your fundamental sanity. She categorically denies important conversations you clearly had, minimizes or completely reinterprets abusive behavior she demonstrated, and distorts past events to create alternative versions of reality that always favor her. "I never said that, you're making things up in your head," she responds with unwavering conviction when you mention a specific promise she made. "You're completely exaggerating what happened, turning a minor misunderstanding into a dramatic tragedy," she declares when you try to carefully address an episode of particularly destructive behavior. And because you desperately want the relationship to work, because you are emotionally and psychologically invested in the fantasy that you are soulmates destined to be together forever, you gradually begin to doubt your own sanity instead of trusting your direct experience and your natural perception of reality. With her, sexuality becomes a sophisticated weapon of psychological control and emotional manipulation, not a natural expression of intimacy, connection, and mutual love. Sex is extraordinarily intense and memorable, but it doesn't represent genuine intimacy. It's a calculated way to create even deeper chemical and emotional dependence. She intuitively understands that sex is one of the most powerful ways to create neurological bonds and emotional dependence, so she strategically uses sexuality as a valuable bargaining chip in the relationship. She offers passionate sex as a Pavlovian reward when you behave exactly the way she approves, when you cancel social plans with friends to spend time with her exclusively, when you publicly defend her against valid criticism from your concerned family, when you unquestioningly accept her creative versions of the conflicts that arise, and she completely withdraws access to physical intimacy as cruel punishment when you misbehave. Physical intimacy becomes a powerful psychological weapon that keeps you trapped in a vicious cycle of need and calculated frustration. You never know when you'll have access to that intense, addictive physical connection again, so you're constantly anxious and hypervigilant, desperately trying to decipher the secret behavioral code of what you need to do to earn sexual intimacy. She lacks a stable, coherent, and authentic self-identity. She's essentially a sophisticated emotional chameleon, dramatically shifting her personality, interests, values, aspirations, and even fundamental personal stories, depending on what she perceives you value, admire, and find attractive. It's as if she's a walking psychological mirror, constantly adapting her personality to maximize her attractiveness and relevance to you specifically. During the first weeks or months of a relationship, this creates an almost magical illusion of perfect compatibility. You miraculously like the same specific things, have the same unique dreams and aspirations, and share the same rare core values. It feels like cosmic destiny, a soulmate sent by the gods, a transcendental connection that defies basic statistical chance. But slowly, as the relationship inevitably deepens and you try to get to know deeper, more authentic layers of her personality, you gradually realize that she is essentially a sophisticated, well-programmed mirror, reflecting back an idealized, romanticized version of yourself. She has methodically become exactly what she perceived you, wanted her to be, based on careful observation of your behaviors, preferences, and casual comments. When you finally try to delve deeper beyond this carefully constructed adaptive mask, desperately trying to discover who she really is beneath this continuous performance, you find a disturbing and frightening void. There's no real substance, no genuine core identity, no authentic personality that exists independently of your presence and approval. It's like trying to have a deep conversation with a sophisticated echo of yourself,